Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So the intro montage for this episode was spent at my buddy Ryan's place, Late Apex Performance Coatings, and we got all of the Mark II's components that were going to be powder coated. So everything is laid out on the table here, and I began reassembling some of the pieces. You can see the catch can is back together for all intents and purposes. And at this point, with these pieces squared away, I can now begin some of the final assembly on the Mark II. So the turbo is currently on its way out to ARM Turbo and Tuning for my buddy Albert to do a rebuild and upgrade on it. So we'll have that back hopefully in the not too distant future. But for right now, I can't put the entire turbo system together since I don't have the turbo here anymore. But I can at least put together what I can right now. And I've already began a little bit of that, which was the most minimal amount that I could possibly do. But I have a brand new Cometic MLS exhaust manifold gasket in place. And once I get the oil filter relocation, the block side of it, put in its home right there, then the header can go on and I can get a little bit of this knocked out and squared away. Well, new or restored parts are making their way onto the Mark II in very short order. So to start off, I guess let's go over on the exhaust side here. And I put the upper intercooler tube in place just to kind of get an idea of how it looks. And I'm really happy with all the blue accents throughout here. So up top, we can see brand new valve cover hardware, valve cover fasteners. And these titanium fasteners, these blue titanium fasteners, those replaced these really ugly old Phillips head screws or Phillips head fasteners that were in there before. Just old school automotive manufacturing. That's what they used for the valve covers before. But since we are in the modern era where we can get much nicer materials and much nicer fasteners kind of in short order and that are readily available, I swapped out to these. So beyond that, looking down in here, we have the header is on for good at this point. Again, using titanium studs, blue titanium nuts, and I had to do quite a bit of surgery to the dipstick to make it work. So rather than the old tab style dipstick that was on here before, that wouldn't work with how I had to bend the dipstick tube, so I had some extra throttle body cable that I cut to length. Did a couple of little tack welds right there if you guys can see them. Those serve as kind of the high-low indicator for the dipstick at this point in time, and everything should be good to go on the dipstick front. So over on the opposite side of the engine, my buddy Russ up at Accelerated, he went ahead and restored the brake booster for me, and I got a brand new brake master cylinder. So this is all good to go. It's all ready for lines to be made, both for the brakes and for the clutch. If you guys remember, I restored the clutch master not too long ago. The clutch slave cylinder is on its way. Once that arrives, I'll put it in place, and then we will be full steam ahead, game on to get the hard lines knocked out for both the braking system and the clutch system. Going along with kind of the theme of blue accents and old school JDM parts, I have a very special part and something I'm very excited about that arrived earlier today. So another piece from Greddy, and they have this really beautiful packaging. Packaging isn't normally that high, but so I can do this with one hand, set it up a little bit easier. And what we have here, so I can get this out of the packaging, is one of their Sakura shift knobs. So these are really cool. You can see the little flowers inside of the knob there. It has the Greddy logo cast into it as well. And they have the flowers and the Greddy logo that are cast inside of what I'm assuming is like an epoxy resin or something along those lines. They send out all the little adapter deals so that way you can put it on hopefully virtually any JDM shifter that's in one of these cars. And they also sent these stickers right here that if I want to, I can put one on top of the shift knob that indicates the shift pattern. But since I don't really need to know the shift pattern, since I already do, I don't need to be reminded of it. I think I'm just going to put the knob on kind of bare, so that way it can showcase the artistry of the entire thing a little bit better. So I'm really, really excited about this. I know it's something kind of stupid and a little trinket item, but I found out about them, decided I wanted one, found out that they were not currently available through Greddy, so I massively overpaid for one off of eBay, and now that I see it here in person, I could not be happier that I bought it. So let's go ahead, put it in the car, and whether you guys are excited about it or not, this is something that I'm really stoked and really geeked about. So let's see what it looks like in the car. Well, I decided to move a couple things around for the sake of building the new brake lines. So I had the map sensor mounted down where that, let me zoom in actually, where this little three-way number 3T is, and I moved it up to here so that way my routing for the brake lines will be a little bit easier. So this front port right here goes to the front brakes, rear one to the rears. Pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory, but it isn't always that way, so don't take this car in this instance kind of verbatim and apply it to your projects. Always do your research and figure out which port goes to where. But that being said, I'm going to go from this nipple right here down to the top of my T there, and from there the lines will split off. One of the lines will go to my driver's side brake, the other side will go to the passenger side brake, and all will be well. So what we're working with in terms of materials is probably no big surprise, but we have some nickel copper line, This one I already straightened out using my handy Amazon line straightener. So I'm going to use this section to make that little line that goes from the brake master down to the T. And I have these little black number 3 line nuts. So let me go ahead, get all of my bending and brake line supplies out. We can get this line knocked out and see if I can't knock out the front brakes before the end of the day. Well, it took way longer than I wanted it to, but all of the hydraulic plumbing on the Mark II is completed at this point in time. So I'll start with kind of the most easily visible things, then we'll work to the more difficult to see items. So this rear port right here is for the rear brake lines. You can see that the line comes out, goes into a Willwood proportioning valve. From there, the line comes down along the side of the strut tower, top the frame rail, and then down, if I can zoom in maybe, into the rear brake line bulkhead right there. The front lines, they come out of the front of the brake master cylinder, 180 degree bend, down to my brake line T, right down in here. Splits off. This front line goes over to the passenger side. The rear line stays over on the driver's side here, and both sides look similar. They loop up and tie into, I think these are old Goodrich hard lines if I remember correctly. They tie in there, or Goodrich soft lines rather. The hard lines tie into the soft lines. Those come down to the calipers. Everything's good to go. And last but not least, we have the clutch line. So from the master, another 180 degree bend, and with both the clutch master and the brake proportioning valve. I had to use regular tube nuts on those, as this I did not have enough space to run a number 3 to inverted flare adapter. And these guys right here were bubble flares that go into the proportioning valve. Again, I didn't have adapters here for them, and I just ran to the parts store this morning, got the tube nuts, the line nuts that I needed, and figured with my flaring tool, since it can do all different types of brake flares, or small diameter tubing flares, I should say, that was the easier option. But that being said, the clutch line runs underneath of the brake booster. Down in here, if I can zoom in, you can see there's a little dual service loop right there. And then from the service loop, it tracks over and goes into the clutch slave cylinder down there that you can see in kind of that olive drab green. So now that all of this is done, I can go ahead and put fluid in both of the reservoirs, start attempting to bleed the system. Hopefully there aren't any leaks anywhere, as it isn't a whole lot of fun to get a couple of these lines in place, but I think we should be good. I got the flares done pretty nicely. That flaring tool that I have does a phenomenal job with it. And I guess the one other point to make is I mentioned the little service loop on the clutch line a moment ago. Again, zooming in, you can see it right above my finger right there. The purpose of that is, since this engine is still on floppy mounts, meaning that unlike the Mark IV, where if we can see it, the engine resides on these engine plates, so the engine can't move anywhere, and you can get a little bit more aggressive with how little movement that you can put into different parts on it. The fact that this engine is still on kind of flexible, movable mounts, the purpose of that little line loop in there is if the engine moves, the transmission is going to move with it, but the clutch master is not going to move. So that little service loop deal is there to provide a little bit of extra material and allow the line to kind of stretch and move as the engine moves around. So big ups to my buddy Sean for giving me the idea to do that. I think that will work very nicely. And above all, I'm very happy and very excited that all of this plumbing work is done. No more interruptions, no more waiting on materials or parts or anything. It's all squared away at this point, and all that is left to do right now is to bleed the systems. Well, it was a pretty interesting day getting the brakes and the clutch bled on the Mark II. So, I guess we'll go in chronological order of the trials and tribulations that I went through today. So, the beginning of the day, I came in all happy and all excited that, hey, I'm finally going to get to make the brakes and the clutch work after doing all the lines and everything else. Well, I started off trying to go and crack all of the brake bleeders loose, as that seemed like a good place to start. And 3 out of the 4 corners went okay. The 4th corner, the bleeder snapped off. So I'm thinking, oh crap, all right. This is not good, but not the end of the world. Let's go ahead, get an easy out, get my setup easy outs out rather. Try to get this thing out of here. So I wasn't able to do that on the car. I ended up with the caliper out of the car, over in the welding room, hammering an easy out, and was finally able to get the remainder of the old bleeder out of it. At that point, I figured out the thread pitch, retapped the bleeder or the bleeder port on the caliper to try to clean things up a little bit, make it so a new bleeder could go in place. Was able to do that and got the caliper back in working order. So once that that nightmare was squared away, it was then time to actually start bleeding the brakes. So I got my vacuum bleeder out and started from the farthest caliper away from the master, worked my way around the car a few times, hopping up into the car to check the actual pedal resistance, checking to make sure that I had brake fluid in the reservoir the whole time, so on and so forth. As I'm doing this, I'm looking at the floor, making sure that there is not a puddle of brake fluid immediately happening on the ground, and to my happiness at that point, there was not. So as time goes on, I happen to look up in the front of the car, or on the ground in the front, or where the front of the car is, and see a puddle of brake fluid. So I come up top, and I realized that my adapter fittings, going from the M10 by 1.0 inverted flare to number 3, they were leaking. So I filmed a little video clip for myself to figure out exactly where the fluid was coming from, figured it out, and I pulled those fittings out of the Brake Master and did a little compare and contrast to a good known JEGS one that I have, and figured out that the taper in the Amazon adapter fittings that I was using, the internal taper that the inverted flare portion actually seals against, was cut A, too deep, and B, potentially at the wrong angle, disallowing those fittings to actually seal up. So a run to the JEGS warehouse was in store then. I went and got new adapter fittings, came back, compared, contrasted, everything worked out well. Got my new fittings in, got the brakes bled the rest of the way, and finally we have hydraulic pressure and hydraulic fluid retained in both the clutch and the braking system for the most part. There is one fitting down below where the rear brake line ties into that, in full disclosure and transparency, I stripped the tube nut out on it a little bit, and I was hoping that it would still seal up, but it has a little bit of fluid that I can feel around that fitting, so, or around that tube nut. So I'm done playing brake system designer today. I'll come in, I'll knock that out and replace that tube nut in the next few days. And then at that point, all of the brakes and the clutch and everything will be good to go. And the next order of business for this car is figuring out the cooling fan situation. One of the other things that I'm doing under the hood of the Mark II is swapping out as many of the OE fasteners as I can for some beautiful new blue titanium ones. So another little piece that came in is this cooling panel from Team Techno Toys, I believe is who I got it from. This is their Mark II Supra cooling panel. It still allows, it has pass-throughs for the hood bumpers as well as the flip-up headlight adjusters. And it fastens down just with one fastener here, which you can see I already have a nice titanium one in that spot. So I'm going to go ahead and, although I don't have all of the fasteners that I need, I have a good assortment of them here already. And I'm going to go ahead and swap out as many of these as I can. So let's go ahead and use some YouTube magic. And here's the before, and now here is the after. So I went ahead and replaced as many of the fasteners as I could right now. You can see the whole front cover has all titanium fasteners. The water pump does as well. The power steering pump also has its nice big titanium nut. And then I pretty much ran out. Oh, I also have the fasteners for the oil filter relocation in place. So need to wait for the rest of those to come in, but very happy with all of the blue accents. It looks very pretty, and I'm very happy with it. Another piece for the Mark II has just shown up, and it's another piece that I'm pretty excited for that will be a big quality of life increase. So right here is the Mark II's new shifter, and hopefully I ordered the right one, but this should be a short shifter for this car. So it'll solve two issues, or it'll do two things, I should say. A, it should make the throws shorter, and B, all this slop that the current shifter has, hopefully it will eliminate that. So let me set you guys on a tripod, get some tools, and get to swapping this over. Well, it only took a few minutes, even counting the modifications that I needed to make, but the Mark II now has a short shifter. And man, from what you guys saw before, this is much better. So I'll put the clutch in. Here's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and reverse. So that feels much better. Not really any slop compared to what there was before, and the shifts are noticeably shorter. So short shifters, they're not like a make it or break it type thing, but they are a quality of life improvement. And since I could get one for this, and the shifter that was in here was more than likely 42 years old, just as the car is, I figured it was time to upgrade it and put something a little bit better in. And I could not be happier with this purchase. Well, the last item that, at least in this video, I've knocked out for the Mark II is its reconditioned, restored, and upgraded ignition module. So I'll put on the screen now what this ignition module looked like before. And you can see that it was worse for wear, and you could definitely tell that it had been in the car for a number of years. And now we have this piece. So I took the igniter off, I disassembled it, sent the housing up to my buddy Russ to be vapor honed. So this, albeit a probably 40-something year old piece of aluminum, it looks as brand new as it possibly can. Beyond that, I put a new ignition coil in this. I reconditioned the mounting bracket with a nice coat of wrinkle black spray paint, converted everything to titanium fasteners, and reloomed all of the wiring and switched everything over to Deutsch connectors. So this is a much nicer igniter and coil and ignition module than what was on the car before. And I'm very happy with the way that it looks. And the other thing that I did with this, just the little attention to detail piece, is I actually razor bladed the old stickers off of this before it went out to be vapor honed so they would not be destroyed, and then I super glued them back on so that way it still looks like an OE Toyota piece, just brand new aside from the stickers, which the stickers having a bit of patina to them, I think that tells a better story. So with this ignition module wrapped up, I think that will be about the end of this episode. So we got a lot done in this episode, and when I set out filming this episode, my intent was to make this the final episode for the Mark II before it goes off for wiring. Now, that is not the case. We'll have one more episode before this thing leaves, but I'm at least very happy with the progress that we have made, and this thing looks absolutely incredible. So I put my ignition, or not my ignition, my spark plug wires in place. I have another set of separators that I'm going to put in to kind of tidy this up a little bit. We got the titanium fastener conversion done, got all of the brake lines done, obviously the intercooler tubing and catch can and the overflow, those are all done in a nice coat of wrinkled black, thanks to my buddy Ryan over at Late Apex Performance Coatings. And we are just about done with this car. I'm just about done with my portion of it before it goes away for wiring. So it'll be kind of sad to not see this car sitting here any longer, but it is for a good cause. As once this thing goes away, the next time that you guys will see it, it'll be running and driving and all of that. So with all that being said, that will be about the end of this one. So thank you guys, as always, for coming on all these different adventures and journeys with me. And although we are very close to finishing the Mark II, I hope that you guys have enjoyed coming along on this rebuild, restoration, and resurrection project, as I have had a blast putting this car back together and doing something other than crazy race car stuff for once. It's cool to have an excuse to put some trinket parts and things like that on, and the excuse ends up being just because I felt like it. Don't ever let people talk you out of doing things, especially with your project, that you just want to do, as those are oftentimes the most fulfilling bits for any of these projects. So I thank you all very much. I love you all, and I hope that this has been entertaining, informative, and everything else for you. But before I ramble on any more, that will be the end of this episode. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, and be sure to check out the limited edition 15th anniversary BPA t-shirts and hoodies. Those are linked in the description below. Feel free to grab one if you would like. If not, then hopefully I come up with some sort of a merchandise item or opportunity for you in the future that speaks to you and is something that you want in your wardrobe. But with all that being said, that'll be the end of this one. So I'll see you all in the next episode.